Good evening, and welcome back to another journey through the ancient world. Tonight we turn our gaze upward, toward the heights of Mount Olympus, where clouds gather thick and heavy with portent, where thunder rolls across marble halls, and where one god stands above all others. Tonight we explore Zeus, the king of the gods, master of lightning, and supreme ruler of the Greek pantheon. Get comfortable, settle in, and let your mind drift back thousands of years, to a time when mortals looked to the heavens, not with telescopes but with prayers, when storms were not merely weather, but the voice of divinity itself. Let me know where in the world you're listening from, and let's begin. Before temples rose from cliffsides, before Homer sang his verses, before Athens claimed wisdom or Sparta claimed war, there was Zeus. He was not simply a god among gods. He was the arbiter of fate, the keeper of cosmic balance, the one who divided the world and set the stars upon their paths. His name echoes through millennia, carried forward not only in myth but in language itself. The very word Zeus derives from the ancient root meaning bright sky, daylight, the shining heavens. To understand Zeus is to understand the ancient Greek worldview. He was father, king, judge, and storm all at once. He could be merciful, granting favor to heroes and cities alike. He could be vengeful, striking down the proud with bolts of fire. He was bound by cosmic law, yet free to reshape the world with a single word. In Zeus, the Greeks saw not perfection, but power tempered by wisdom, strength balanced by responsibility. His story begins not in glory, but in darkness, hidden away in a cave, protected by deception, destined from birth to overthrow his father just as his father had overthrown the generation before. It is a tale of prophecy and rebellion, of brothers and sisters united against tyranny, of a war that shook the very foundations of the earth. And it is a story that would define not just one god, but an entire age of mythology. Long before Zeus became king, there ruled another. His name was Cronus, youngest and cleverest of the Titans, those ancient gods who came before the Olympians. Cronus had seized power through violence, castrating his own father Uranus with a sickle forged by the earth herself, Gaia. He took the throne and wed his sister Rhea, and for a time the world knew a kind of peace. But peace built on blood is rarely secure. Cronus had heard the same prophecy his father before him had feared, that one of his own children would rise up and cast him down, just as he had done to Uranus. The curse echoed through generations, a cycle of sons overthrowing fathers, each king living in dread of the next, and so Cronus, mighty though he was, became consumed by paranoia. When Rhea bore their first child, a daughter named Hestia, Cronus did not hold her, did not name her, did not celebrate. Instead, he opened his jaws wide and swallowed her whole. Not dead, but trapped within his belly, suspended in a kind of living imprisonment. Rhea wept, but Cronus was unmoved. The prophecy would not be fulfilled on his watch. One by one the children came. Demeter, goddess of harvest, Hera, who would one day be queen, Hades, lord of the unseen, Poseidon, who would command the seas. Each was swallowed at birth, each imprisoned in the dark belly of their father. 5 children lost, and still Cronus sat his throne, believing himself safe. But when Rhea felt the 6th child stirring in her womb, something in her broke. She could not bear to lose another. She went to her mother, Gaia, the ancient earth, and together they devised a plan. Rhea fled in secret to the island of Crete, far from the eyes of her husband. There, in a cave upon Mount Ida, hidden among shepherds and wild things, she gave birth to her youngest son. His name was Zeus. The cave where Zeus was born would become sacred, a place of pilgrimage for generations to come. Different ancient sources identify different locations. Some point to a cave on Mount Ida in central Crete, while others name the Dictaean cave in eastern Crete. Both sites claim to be Zeus's birthplace in antiquity, and both became important cult centers. The stories vary in their details, but all agree on the essential truth. The child was hidden, protected, kept from his father's sight. To deceive Cronus, Rhea wrapped a large stone in swaddling cloth and presented it to him. Cronus, eager to be done with the threat, swallowed it without question, believing he had consumed his final child. Meanwhile, deep in the Cretan wilderness, Zeus grew. He was nursed by Amalthea, described in some traditions as a nymph, and in others as a divine goat whose milk gave him strength beyond mortal measure. The varying accounts suggest the story evolved over time, but both versions agree that Amalthea's nourishment was crucial to Zeus's survival and development. When Amalthea died, Zeus honored her by placing her hide among the stars, where she became a constellation, and from her broken horn came the cornucopia, the horn of plenty, symbol of endless abundance. The infant's cries were loud and strong, and they risked giving away his location. To mask the sound, a group of young warriors called the Curetes danced around the cave, clashing their shields and spears in rhythmic thunder, drowning out the voice of the future king. They became his first guardians, loyal to a child who would one day reshape the world. Zeus did not remain an infant for long. In the way of gods, he matured swiftly, growing tall and strong, his eyes sharp as the mountain wind, his voice carrying the weight of destiny. He learned from the wild places, from the nymphs who taught him the secrets of earth and sky, from the silence of stone and the whisper of leaves. He learned patience, cunning, and the art of waiting for the right moment. Gaia, his grandmother, watched over him with particular care. She had seen generations rise and fall. She had birthed the Titans and watched them imprison her monstrous children, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires. She had aided Cronus in his rebellion, only to see him become another tyrant. Now she placed her hope in Zeus, the third generation, the one who might break the cycle not through strength alone, but through wisdom. As Zeus reached manhood, Gaia spoke to him of what had been and what must be. She told him of his siblings trapped in darkness within their father's belly. She spoke of the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, imprisoned deep in Tartarus for no crime but their appearance. She whispered to him the prophecy that haunted Cronus, the fear that drove him to such cruelty. And Zeus listened, and he understood that his path was set before him long before he was born. The time had come for Zeus to leave the safety of Crete. The time had come to return to his father's house, not as a son seeking reconciliation, but as an agent of fate, carrying with him the weight of destiny and the hope of liberation. Zeus did not march into his father's hall with weapons drawn. He was clever, patient, shaped by years of hiding and watching. Instead, he came in disguise, taking the position of a cupbearer in Cronus's court. His father did not recognize him. How could he? Cronus believed all his sons were either swallowed or dead. This young god who served him wine was simply another attendant, another face among many. But Zeus had an ally, a titaness named Metis, whose name meant wisdom and cunning. She was a daughter of Oceanus, one of the few titans who would side with the younger gods in the war to come. Metis concocted a special potion, a mixture of mustard and wine, bitter and unsettling. Some accounts say it was an emetic designed to induce vomiting. Others claim it was enchanted, compelling the drinker to expel what should not be held within. Zeus bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment. When it came, he poured the potion into Cronus's cup and watched as the Titan king drank deeply. The effect was immediate and violent. Cronus doubled over, his body rejecting the contents of his belly. One by one, he vomited forth the children he had swallowed, not as infants but as full-grown gods, radiant and powerful, ready to claim their birthright. First came Poseidon, god of the sea, emerging with salt spray and the crash of waves. Then Hades, somber and unyielding, lord of the deep places. Hera followed, regal and fierce. Demeter, who would make the earth bloom. And finally Hestia, eldest of them all, the gentle keeper of the hearth. They stood before Cronus no longer helpless infants, but gods in their own right, and they looked upon their father not with gratitude, but with cold resolve. The stone Cronus had swallowed years before came last, tumbling from his lips and landing heavily upon the ground. According to tradition, Zeus took this stone and set it at Delphi, where it became a sacred monument called the Omphalos, marking the center of the world and serving as a reminder of the moment when the old order began to crumble. Cronus realized too late what had happened. The child he thought safely consumed was the architect of his undoing. The prophecy he had tried so desperately to prevent was unfolding before his eyes. Rage and fear warred within him, but there was no time for regret. Zeus and his siblings were already moving, their minds set on one purpose, to overthrow the Titans and claim rulership of the cosmos. But they could not do it alone. The Titans were ancient and powerful, masters of the elements, commanders of vast cosmic forces. Zeus needed allies, and he knew where to find them. Deep beneath the earth, in the black pit of Tartarus, languished the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, imprisoned first by Uranus and then by Cronus, denied light and freedom for countless ages. Zeus descended into that terrible place, where even gods feared to tread. He broke the chains that bound the Cyclopes, those one-eyed giants who were masters of craft and fire. They greeted him not with suspicion, but with gratitude, and in return for their freedom, they forged for him the greatest weapons ever made. To Zeus they gave the thunderbolt, a spear of pure lightning that crackled with the power of the storm, capable of shattering mountains and splitting the sky. To Poseidon they fashioned the trident, a three-pronged spear that could command the waves, stir earthquakes, and summon tempests from calm seas. To Hades they crafted the helm of darkness, a helmet that rendered its wearer invisible, unseen even by the gods. Zeus also freed the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, each with 50 heads and 100 arms, beings of such terrible strength that even the Titans had feared them. These giants, named Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, pledged themselves to Zeus's cause, eager to repay their liberator and to strike back at those who had imprisoned them. With these allies and these weapons, Zeus and his siblings prepared for war. They established their base upon Mount Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, where the air was thin and the clouds gathered thick. From there they looked south toward Mount Othrys, where Cronus and the Titans held their ground, and they knew that what was coming would reshape the world. The battle lines were drawn. On one side stood the Olympians, led by Zeus, young and determined, armed with divine weapons and monstrous allies. On the other stood the Titans, ancient and proud, led by Cronus and his brothers Iapetus, Hyperion, Coeus, and Creus. Atlas, son of Iapetus, took command of the Titan forces, a general of terrible skill. The stage was set for a war that would last 10 long years and shake the very pillars of creation. The war that followed was called the Titanomachy, the battle of Titans and Olympians, and it was unlike anything the world had known. For 10 years, the earth trembled, the skies burned, and the seas boiled as gods clashed in combat that transcended mortal understanding. Mountains were hurled like stones, rivers were torn from their beds, the very fabric of reality strained under the weight of divine fury. From Mount Olympus, Zeus led his forces with a combination of tactical brilliance and overwhelming power. He was not content merely to fight. He sought to unite the Olympians into a cohesive force, each playing to their strengths. Poseidon commanded the waters, sending tidal waves crashing against the Titans. Hades used his helm of darkness to strike unseen, sowing confusion among the enemy ranks. Hera, Demeter, and Hestia stood firm, their presence stabilizing the Olympian lines. Zeus himself wielded the thunderbolt with devastating effect. Lightning arced across the battlefield, striking Titans with bolts of fire that left the ground scorched and smoking. Thunder rolled like the drums of war, and the sky itself seemed to roar in approval of the young god's might. His very presence inspired his allies and struck fear into his enemies. The Titans, for their part, were no easy opponents. They had ruled the cosmos for eons, and they knew the ways of power. Hyperion brought blinding light that seared the eyes of the Olympians. Coeus wielded knowledge as a weapon, predicting movements before they happened. Creus commanded the constellations, and Iapetus struck with the fury of 1,000 storms. But it was Atlas who proved the most formidable, a warrior of unmatched strength who held the Olympian advance at bay time and again. Yet the Olympians had advantages the Titans could not match. The Cyclopes continued to forge weapons and armor, supplying Zeus's forces with divine armaments. The Hecatonchires proved to be the ultimate siege weapons, hurling entire boulders by the hundreds, their many hands working in terrifying synchrony. Wherever they appeared, the Titan lines faltered and broke. Not all Titans fought for Cronus. Themis, the Titaness of divine law, sided with Zeus from the beginning, recognizing the justice in his cause. Prometheus, the clever one, foresaw the outcome of the war and chose not to fight for a losing side. His brother Epimetheus followed his lead. Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world, remained neutral. refusing to take sides in a conflict he deemed inevitable. The goddess Styx, daughter of Oceanus, was the first to pledge her loyalty to Zeus, bringing with her 4 powerful children: Nike, the spirit of victory; Zealous, the spirit of rivalry; Kratos, the embodiment of strength; and Baia, the personification of force. In gratitude, Zeus made Styx the goddess by whose name the gods would swear their most sacred oaths, and her children became guardians of his throne, symbols of his authority. Year after year the battle raged. The sky darkened with smoke and ash. The earth split open in places, revealing glimpses of Tartarus below. Seas dried and reformed. Entire landscapes were reshaped by the conflict. Mortals, newly created by Prometheus, huddled in caves and prayed to forces they did not understand, while above them, gods fought for the right to rule. The turning point came not through brute strength alone, but through strategy. Zeus recognized that the war had become a stalemate. The Titans were too strong to be defeated by conventional means, so he devised a plan. Under cover of darkness, Hades donned his helm of invisibility and infiltrated the Titan camp upon Mount Othrys. He moved unseen among their ranks, destroying their weapons, sabotaging their supplies, sowing chaos and confusion. When dawn broke, Zeus launched a final massive assault. The Hecatonchires led the charge, hurling mountains at the Titans, burying them under stone and earth. The Cyclopes struck with lightning and thunder, their crafts transforming the battlefield into a hellscape of fire and destruction. Poseidon shook the ground with his trident, causing earthquakes that toppled the very foundations of Mount Othrys. Zeus himself stood at the forefront, his thunderbolt blazing in his hand. He struck Cronus with a bolt so powerful it split the sky, driving his father to his knees. The other Titans fell one by one, overwhelmed by the combined might of the Olympians and their allies. Atlas, the last to surrender, was singled out by Zeus for special punishment. For his role as battlefield commander, Atlas was condemned to hold up the sky itself for all eternity. His strength turned into an eternal burden. The defeated Titans were cast down into Tartarus, that black pit beneath the earth where light never reaches. Bronze gates sealed them in, forged by the Cyclopes and guarded by the Hecatonchires, who would serve as eternal jailers. Cronus, once king of the cosmos, was imprisoned alongside his brothers, his reign ended by the very son he had tried so desperately to prevent from being born. The Titanomachy was over. The old order had fallen, and from its ashes, a new age began. With the war won and the Titans imprisoned, the question of rulership remained. Zeus had led the rebellion and commanded the Olympians to victory, but he was not the only god with a claim to power. His brothers Poseidon and Hades had fought just as fiercely, suffered just as much. The world was vast, and it could not be ruled by one alone without breeding resentment and future conflict. So the 3 brothers agreed to divide the cosmos by lot, letting fate itself determine who would rule where. They drew lots, and the result would shape the Greek understanding of the universe for all time. Zeus drew the longest lot and was granted the heavens, the sky, and the air. He became god of thunder and lightning, master of storms, keeper of the weather. Mount Olympus became his throne, the highest place in the mortal world, where clouds gathered thick and eagles soared. From there he could see all things, command all gods, and dispense justice to mortals and immortals alike. He was recognized as king of the gods, not simply because he ruled the sky, but because the sky itself was supreme, touching all places, encompassing all realms. Poseidon drew the middle lot and received dominion over the seas. Every ocean, every river, every spring and stream fell under his command. He was god of earthquakes as well, the earth-shaker who could split islands with a blow of his trident. Beneath the waves he built a palace of coral and gold, and from there he ruled over creatures known and unknown, from dolphins to sea serpents, from mermaids to the monstrous leviathans that lurked in the deepest trenches. Hades drew the shortest lot, and to him fell the underworld, the realm of the dead. It was not a punishment but a responsibility, a kingdom as vast and important as any other. Hades ruled over the shades of the departed, judging souls, maintaining the balance between life and death. His realm was hidden beneath the earth, a place of shadow and silence, but it was no less essential to the cosmic order. Wealth too fell under his domain, for all riches, all gold and gems came from the depths of the earth. The earth itself was left common to all three, a shared realm where mortals dwelt and gods could walk freely. Mountains belonged to no single deity. Forests grew wild under no one banner. It was a place of intersection, where divine and mortal worlds met, where heroes rose and fell, where temples were built and prayers were offered. Zeus established his court upon Olympus, calling the gods to him. His sisters, Hestia, Demeter, and Hera, took their places among the divine council. New gods emerged or were born, filling roles and embodying aspects of existence. Athena, born from Zeus's own head, became goddess of wisdom and strategic war. Apollo and Artemis, twin children of Zeus and the Titaness Leto, claimed dominion over light, prophecy, hunting, and the moon. Hermes, swift and clever, became the messenger of the gods. Ares, brutal and fierce, embodied the chaos of war. Hephaestus, master craftsman, forged divine weapons and wonders. Aphrodite, born from the sea foam where Uranus's severed flesh had fallen, brought beauty and desire. Together, these gods formed the Olympian pantheon, the 12 primary deities who would shape Greek religion for centuries. They were not always harmonious. They quarreled, schemed, loved, and betrayed. But they were united under Zeus's rule, bound by his authority and by the cosmic order he maintained. Yet Zeus's reign was not unchallenged. Power, once seized, must always be defended. And the earth itself, Gaia, was not finished testing the new king of the gods. No sooner had Zeus secured his throne than new threats emerged, though the exact timeline of these challenges varies in different ancient sources. Gaia, the ancient earth, was displeased with how her children, the Titans, had been treated, imprisoned in darkness without mercy. She had once aided Zeus, but now she turned against him, giving birth to a new generation of challengers. First came the giants, the Gigantes, born from the blood of Uranus, where it had fallen upon the earth when Cronus castrated him. They were enormous beings, terrible and strong, with serpents for legs and an unquenchable hatred for the Olympians. The war that followed, called the Gigantomachy, tested Zeus once again. The giants were formidable opponents, immune to harm from gods alone. An oracle prophesied that only with the aid of a mortal hero could the giants be defeated. So Zeus called upon Heracles, his mortal son, mightiest of all heroes, to fight alongside the gods. The battle was fierce. The giants hurled mountains and trees at Olympus. They set fire to the world and darkened the sky with smoke. But Zeus and his allies stood firm. Athena fought with strategic brilliance. Apollo and Artemis struck from a distance with their arrows. Hephaestus wielded molten metal. Poseidon tore islands from their roots and used them as weapons. And Heracles, with his lion-skin cloak and unbreakable club, struck down giant after giant. In the end, the Olympians prevailed. The giants were slain or buried beneath the earth, their bodies forming the mountains and volcanoes that still shake and rumble with their dying breath. Gaia's challenge had been met and answered, and Zeus's rule stood secure. But the greatest test was yet to come. Enraged by the defeat of both titans and giants, Gaia gave birth to one final monster, a creature so terrible that even the gods trembled at its approach. His name was Typhon, sometimes also called Typhoeus or Typhaon, and he was the deadliest being ever to walk the earth. In Hesiod's account, Typhon was born from the union of Gaia and Tartarus, making him a primordial force of destruction. Typhon was beyond imagination. He was taller than mountains, with 100 dragon heads sprouting from his shoulders, each spitting fire and venom. His eyes burned with malevolent light. His voice was a cacophony of every sound: the roar of lions, the bark of dogs, the hiss of serpents, the bellow of bulls. When he moved, the earth split beneath him. When he breathed, flames consumed forests. He was chaos incarnate, the ultimate embodiment of destruction. When Typhon rose from the depths and began his march toward Olympus, panic seized the gods. Many fled, transforming themselves into animals to escape his wrath. Some accounts say they fled to Egypt and hid among the mortals, but Zeus did not flee. He was king of the gods, and if Olympus was to fall, it would not be because he abandoned it. The battle between Zeus and Typhon was cataclysmic. The two titans of power clashed with such force that the world itself groaned. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, striking Typhon again and again, scorching his dragon heads, burning his flesh. Typhon retaliated with torrents of flame and poison, darkening the sky, boiling the seas. Mountains crumbled, rivers turned to steam. The very air seemed to catch fire. For a time, it seemed Typhon might win. In some later versions of the myth, particularly those told by Apollodorus and other Hellenistic writers, Typhon managed to overpower Zeus, tearing the sinews from his body and hiding them away, leaving the king of the gods helpless in a cave. But Hermes and the god Pan retrieved the sinews and restored Zeus, who rose again with renewed fury. In Hesiod's earlier account, Zeus prevailed through overwhelming force. He unleashed the full power of his thunderbolts, striking Typhon with such intensity that the monster staggered. Zeus lifted an entire mountain and brought it down upon Typhon, burying him beneath its weight. That mountain, according to later tradition, was Mount Etna in Sicily, and to this day the volcano rumbles and spits fire. The ancient Greeks believed that Typhon still writhes beneath it, his fiery breath erupting through the earth. Some accounts place him under different volcanic sites, suggesting the story adapted to explain various volcanic activity across the Mediterranean world. With Typhon defeated and buried, the last great challenge to Zeus's rule was ended. No force, mortal or divine, would ever come so close to unseating him again. He had proven himself not merely through birth or prophecy, but through courage, strength, and the willingness to stand alone when others fled. He was king not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. With his enemies defeated and his throne secure, Zeus set about establishing order across the cosmos. He was no longer merely a rebel or a warrior. He was a king, and kingship demanded more than strength. It required wisdom, judgment, and the ability to balance competing interests. Zeus established Olympus as the center of divine power, a place where the gods could gather, deliberate, and make decisions that would affect both heaven and earth. He sat upon a golden throne, flanked by his symbols of authority: the thunderbolt, the scepter, and the aegis, a great shield sometimes depicted as bearing the head of the Gorgon Medusa. He was not a distant, unknowable deity. Zeus was intimately involved in the affairs of gods and mortals alike. He presided over the divine council, mediating disputes, assigning roles, and ensuring that each god fulfilled their responsibilities. He was the ultimate arbiter, and his word was law. But Zeus was more than just king of Olympus. He was also the Sky Father, the god of weather and storms. When thunder rolled across the heavens, it was Zeus's voice. When lightning split the sky, it was his anger or his warning. Rain, wind, and clear skies all fell under his command. Sailors prayed to him for safe passage. Farmers offered sacrifices for timely rains. Kings invoked his name when swearing oaths. Zeus was also the protector of justice, order, and law. He was often called Zeus Horkios, the keeper of oaths, for he punished those who broke their promises or dealt falsely. Those caught in lies were required to erect statues in his honor at sanctuaries like Olympia, public acknowledgments of their wrongdoing. Zeus ensured that contracts were honored, that treaties were kept, and that justice, however imperfect, was served. He was Zeus Xenios, protector of hospitality and strangers. In ancient Greece, hospitality was sacred. To turn away a guest or to harm a stranger was to invite Zeus's wrath. He watched over travelers and punished those who violated the bonds of guest friendship. This role made him central to Greek social order, a guarantor of the civilized norms that held society together. Zeus was also associated with kingship itself. Mortal rulers claimed descent from him, tracing their lineage back to divine blood. To be a king was to be, in some sense, a reflection of Zeus's authority on earth. Just as Zeus ruled the gods with a combination of power and wisdom, so too were mortal kings expected to govern with justice and strength. His relationship with the other Olympians was complex. He was their leader, but he was not a tyrant. He listened to counsel, valued the wisdom of Athena, respected the power of Poseidon and Hades, and honored the domains of each god. Yet he was also the final authority. When gods clashed, Zeus intervened. When disputes arose, his judgment settled them. And when someone, god or mortal, challenged the cosmic order, Zeus was the one who restored balance. He assigned roles and domains to the gods, ensuring that every aspect of existence had a guardian. Apollo watched over prophecy, music, and healing. Artemis protected the wild places and the hunt. Aphrodite governed love and desire. Ares embodied war in all its brutality. Hephaestus forged the tools and weapons that equipped both gods and heroes. Demeter ensured the harvest. Hermes carried messages and guided souls. Each had their sphere, and Zeus ensured they remained in balance. Yet for all his authority, Zeus was not infallible. He could be deceived, outmaneuvered, and even temporarily overcome. His wife Hera conspired against him more than once. Prometheus tricked him into accepting the lesser portion of sacrifices. His own desires often led him into complicated situations that required cunning to escape. Zeus was powerful, but he was also remarkably human in his flaws, his passions, and his contradictions. This combination of supreme authority and recognizable weakness made Zeus compelling. He was not a distant, perfect deity, but a god who struggled, who made mistakes, who learned and adapted. He could be generous and cruel, wise and impulsive, faithful to cosmic law yet willing to bend rules when it suited him. In Zeus, the Greeks saw the complexity of power itself. Every god had their symbols, markers of identity that appeared in art, ritual, and story. For Zeus, these symbols were not mere decorations but extensions of his power and character, each carrying deep significance. The thunderbolt was his most iconic attribute. Forged by the Cyclopes during the Titanomachy, it was a weapon of devastating power, capable of destroying anything it touched. But it was more than a weapon. The thunderbolt represented divine authority, the power to punish and protect, to bring justice from the heavens. When artists depicted Zeus, they almost always included the thunderbolt, often shown as a zigzag of lightning grasped in his hand or poised to throw. The thunderbolt also symbolized Zeus's role as skyfather. Lightning was the most dramatic manifestation of his presence, visible across vast distances, capable of striking without warning. In a world without scientific explanations for weather, lightning was proof of divine intervention, a reminder that the gods watched and judged. The eagle was Zeus's sacred bird, the king of birds serving the king of gods. Eagles soared higher than any other creature, closer to the heavens, and their sharp eyes could see all things below. They became messengers of Zeus, carrying his will across the world. In myth, Zeus sometimes transformed himself into an eagle, most famously when he abducted the beautiful youth Ganymede to serve as cupbearer on Olympus. The eagle represented majesty, power, and divine vision. Roman legions would later adopt the eagle as their standard, a direct inheritance from Zeus worship through his Roman counterpart Jupiter. Even today, eagles remain symbols of authority and power, a legacy that stretches back to ancient Greece and the god who claimed them as his own. The oak tree was sacred to Zeus throughout the Greek world. At Dodona, one of the oldest oracles in Greece, Zeus spoke through the rustling of oak leaves. Priests and priestesses interpreted these sounds as divine messages, answering questions brought by pilgrims from across the Mediterranean. The oak was chosen for its strength and longevity. These trees could live for centuries, their roots reaching deep into the earth, their branches spreading wide toward the sky. They embodied permanence and stability, qualities associated with Zeus's reign. The aegis was another of Zeus's symbols, though its exact nature varied in different accounts. Sometimes described as a shield, other times as a breastplate or cloak, the aegis was a protective garment that inspired terror in Zeus's enemies. According to some myths, it was made from the hide of Amalthea, the goat who nursed Zeus as an infant. In other versions, it bore the head of the Gorgon Medusa, whose gaze turned viewers to stone. Zeus sometimes lent the aegis to Athena, his favorite daughter, allowing her to wield its protective and terrifying power. The scepter was the symbol of Zeus's kingship, representing his authority over gods and mortals. In artistic depictions, he often held a long staff topped with an eagle or other ornament, signifying his role as supreme ruler. The scepter was not just ceremonial, but functional in myth. Zeus used it to summon the gods, to make pronouncements, to establish law. The bull was another animal associated with Zeus, representing his raw masculine power and fertility. Zeus transformed himself into a bull when he abducted Europa, the Phoenician princess, who would give her name to Europe. In this form, he was both magnificent and unthreatening, beautiful enough to approach but powerful enough to carry her across the sea to Crete. The bull also connected Zeus to older traditions of sky gods and storm deities from Near Eastern cultures. These symbols appeared everywhere in Greek culture. Coins bore the eagle and thunderbolt. Temple pediments showed Zeus enthroned with scepter in hand. Votive offerings depicted miniature thunderbolts. When Greeks swore oaths, they invoked Zeus and his symbols as witnesses. The symbols became shorthand for divine authority, instantly recognizable across the Greek-speaking world. In art, Zeus was typically portrayed as a mature, bearded man with a powerful physique, seated on a throne or standing in a commanding pose. His expression was serious, dignified, reflecting his role as king and judge. Later artistic traditions would soften this image somewhat, but the essential character remained. Zeus was power personified, authority made visible, the divine order given human form. Zeus's personal life was complicated, to say the least. His romantic entanglements were legendary, producing dozens of children who would populate the Greek pantheon and shape mythology for centuries. But before the countless affairs came, the marriages, formal unions that established alliances and produced some of the most important gods. His first wife was Metis, the titaness of wisdom and cunning. She had helped him overthrow Cronus, providing the potion that made the Titan king regurgitate Zeus's siblings. Their union seemed natural, joining Zeus's power with Metis's intelligence. But when Metis became pregnant, Zeus received a disturbing prophecy from Gaia and Uranus. Metis would bear 2 children, first a daughter, then a son who would be greater than his father and eventually overthrow him. The prophecy triggered Zeus's deepest fear, the same curse that had plagued Uranus and Cronus before him. Rather than risk being overthrown by his own son, Zeus made a drastic decision. According to some accounts, he tricked Metis by challenging her to a shape-shifting contest, and when she transformed into a fly or some small creature, he swallowed her whole. What Zeus did not realize was that Metis was already pregnant with their first child. Inside Zeus's belly, Metis gave birth to Athena and began crafting armor and weapons for her daughter. The constant hammering and forging caused Zeus unbearable headaches. Some accounts say it was Prometheus who assisted, while others name Hephaestus, though the timeline becomes tangled here as Hephaestus's birth came later in most tellings. Regardless of who wielded the tool, Zeus's skull was split open with an axe, and from the wound sprang Athena, fully grown and fully armored, shouting a war cry that shook Olympus. She was wisdom incarnate, born directly from Zeus's head, combining her father's authority with her mother's cunning. She would become one of the most important and respected gods, patron of Athens, goddess of both wisdom and strategic warfare. Metis herself remained within Zeus, though what became of her varies by tradition. Some suggest she continued to exist within him, her wisdom now literally part of his being, advising him from within. Others see her transformation into Athena as her true continuation. In this way, Zeus absorbed the threat while gaining Metis's knowledge as an integral part of his being. He had broken the cycle of sons overthrowing fathers, not through murder, but through transformation. Zeus's second wife was Themis, the titaness of divine law and order. Their union was more formal, less passionate, but deeply significant. Themis embodied the natural order, the cosmic law that even gods must obey. From their union came the Horae, goddesses of the seasons and natural order, often depicted as 3 sisters: Eunomia, good order; Dike, justice; and Irene, peace. These goddesses represented the structure that Zeus's rule had brought to the cosmos. Themis and Zeus also produced the Moirai, the 3 fates: Clotho, who spun the thread of life; Lachesis, who measured its length; and Atropos, who cut it when the time came. Even Zeus could not overrule the fates. They represented destiny itself, the ultimate cosmic law that bound all beings, mortal and divine. In this way, Zeus's marriage to Themis acknowledged limits to his own power, a recognition that some forces transcend even the king of gods. His third wife was Eurynome, a daughter of Oceanus. Their union produced the 3 charites or graces: Aglaia, splendor; Euphrosyne, joy; and Thalia, festivity. These goddesses embodied beauty, charm, and all that makes life worth living. They attended Aphrodite and were associated with poetry, music, and dance. Through them, Zeus's influence extended into the realm of art and culture. Zeus's fourth wife was Demeter, his sister, goddess of the harvest and agriculture. Their relationship was complex and ultimately troubled, but it produced one of the most important goddesses in Greek mythology, Persephone. Persephone would later be abducted by Hades, leading to the cycle of seasons, as Demeter's grief caused winter and her joy brought spring. This myth became central to the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most important religious traditions in ancient Greece. Zeus also fathered children with Mnemosyne, the titaness of memory. For 9 consecutive nights, Zeus lay with her, and from this union came the 9 muses: Calliope, epic poetry; Clio, history; Erato, love poetry; Euterpe, music; Melpomene, tragedy; Polyhymnia, hymns; Terpsichore, dance; Thalia, comedy; and Urania, astronomy. The Muses became the inspirations for all artistic and intellectual endeavor, patronesses of poets, historians, and scientists. Their presence in Greek culture was profound, invoked at the beginning of every epic poem and honored in sanctuaries dedicated to learning and arts. With Leto, another titaness and daughter of the titans Coeus and Phoebe, Zeus fathered the twin gods Apollo and Artemis. But this pregnancy came with difficulty. Hera, consumed by jealousy, forbade any land from giving Leto shelter to give birth. Leto wandered, suffering and desperate, until she found the floating island of Delos, which was not technically land, and therefore not bound by Hera's decree. There, clinging to a palm tree, Leto gave birth first to Artemis, who immediately helped deliver her twin brother Apollo. Apollo became god of light, music, prophecy, healing, and the sun. He claimed the oracle at Delphi as his own, making it the most important prophetic site in Greece. Artemis became goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, and the moon, a virgin goddess who roamed forests with her band of nymphs, fierce and independent. These twins were among the most widely worshipped gods in Greece. Their temples spread across the Mediterranean. But Zeus's most important marriage, at least politically, was his last. His union with Hera, his sister, and the Queen of Olympus. Hera was goddess of marriage, childbirth, and family, which made the irony of Zeus's countless infidelities all the more painful for her. Their marriage was tumultuous, marked by Zeus's affairs and Hera's vengeful responses. Together, Zeus and Hera had several children. Ares, the god of war, was born from their union, though neither parent particularly favored him. Ares was brutal and bloodthirsty, representing the chaos and violence of battle rather than strategic warfare. He was often bested in combat, even by mortals, and his temperament made him unpopular among gods and humans alike. Hebe, goddess of youth, was another child of Zeus and Hera. She served as cupbearer to the gods before being replaced by Ganymede, and later married Heracles when he ascended to Olympus. Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, was also their daughter, playing a crucial role in births both divine and mortal. Hera sometimes used her control over Eileithyia to delay or complicate births, particularly those of Zeus's children by other women. The circumstances of Hephaestus's birth varied in different accounts. In some versions, Hera bore him alone, without Zeus, as revenge for Zeus giving birth to Athena by himself. In others, both parents conceived him, but Hera threw him from Olympus because he was born lame and deformed. Hephaestus landed in the sea, where he was raised by the sea nymphs Thetis and Eurynome. He became the greatest craftsman among the gods, creating magnificent palaces, weapons, and mechanical wonders. Despite his physical imperfection, his skills made him indispensable. Through these marriages and unions, Zeus built the Olympian pantheon, populating it with gods who would govern every aspect of existence. Each child inherited aspects of Zeus's power while developing their own domains and personalities. Together they formed a divine family that was remarkably dysfunctional, yet undeniably powerful, ruling over heaven, earth, and sea. If Zeus's divine relationships were complicated, his affairs with mortal women were even more so. These liaisons produced a generation of heroes whose exploits would define the Greek heroic age. But they also provoked Hera's wrath. leading to persecution, transformation, and tragedy for many of Zeus's mortal lovers and their children. Zeus did not approach mortal women in his true form. The full glory of a god was too much for mortals to bear, as the unfortunate Semele would discover. Instead, Zeus took various disguises, each tailored to the situation and the woman he pursued. Deity, Princess of Argos, was one of Zeus's most famous mortal loves. Her father, King Acrisius, had received a prophecy that his grandson would one day kill him. To prevent this, Acrisius locked Danae in a bronze chamber underground where no man could reach her. But Zeus transformed himself into a shower of golden rain, seeping through cracks in the chamber, and impregnated Danae in this form. The child born from this union was Perseus, who would become one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. When Acrisius discovered the baby, he placed both mother and child in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, unwilling to kill his own daughter directly. They survived, washing ashore on the island of Seriphos, where Perseus grew to manhood and eventually fulfilled the prophecy by accidentally killing Acrisius with a discus. Alcmene of Thebes was another mortal woman who caught Zeus's attention. She was married to Amphitryon, a general away at war. Zeus took Amphitryon's form and came to Alcmene, extending a single night into 3 so he could spend more time with her. From this union came Heracles, the greatest of all Greek heroes. Heracles' life was marked by extraordinary strength and equally extraordinary suffering. Hera, enraged by yet another of Zeus's affairs, persecuted Heracles from birth. She sent serpents to kill him in his cradle, but the infant strangled them with his bare hands. Later she drove him mad, causing him to murder his own wife and children. The famous 12 labors were penance for this crime, tasks so difficult they seemed impossible, yet Heracles completed them all. Through Heracles, Zeus's bloodline spread across Greece. Heracles fathered numerous children, and many ruling families claimed descent from him. The Spartans traced their kings back to Heracles. The hero's deification after death made him a bridge between mortal and divine, a symbol of how humans might transcend their limitations through courage and endurance. Leda, queen of Sparta, was seduced by Zeus in the form of a swan. The circumstances were dramatic. Leda was bathing when a swan, fleeing from an eagle, sought her protection. The swan was Zeus in disguise, and the eagle was either genuine or another aspect of Zeus's plan. From this union, Leda laid eggs from which hatched 4 children. The exact parentage varied in different accounts, but most agreed that Helen and Polydeuces were children of Zeus, while Clytemnestra and Castor were children of Leda's mortal husband Tyndareus. Helen would become the most beautiful woman in the world, whose face would launch 1,000 ships and cause the Trojan War. Polydeuces and Castor became the Dioscuri, the twin heroes known for their horsemanship and brotherhood. When Castor died, Polydeuces, being immortal, shared his immortality with his brother, and Zeus placed them in the sky as the constellation Gemini. Semele was a Theban princess, daughter of King Cadmus. Zeus fell in love with her and visited her regularly. When Semele became pregnant, Hera discovered the affair and devised a cruel revenge. Disguised as Semele's old nurse, Hera convinced the princess to ask Zeus to reveal himself in his true divine form, suggesting this would prove he truly loved her. Zeus had sworn an oath on the river Styx to grant Semele any request, and such oaths bound even the king of gods absolutely. Unable to refuse, he appeared before her in his full glory, complete with thunder and lightning. The divine radiance was too much for mortal flesh to bear, and Semele was instantly consumed by fire. Zeus rescued the unborn child from her ashes and sewed him into his own thigh, carrying him to term. This child was Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and theatre, the twice-born god who would eventually claim a seat among the 12 Olympians. Europa was a Phoenician princess, whose abduction gave an entire continent its name. Zeus appeared to her as a magnificent white bull, gentle and beautiful, while she played with her companions on a beach. Intrigued, Europa approached and eventually climbed onto the bull's back. Zeus immediately plunged into the sea and swam to Crete, carrying Europa with him. On Crete, Zeus revealed his true identity and made Europa his consort. She bore him 3 sons, Minos, who would become king of Crete, and, after death, a judge in the underworld, Rhadamanthus, another judge of the dead, and Sarpedon, who would later fight in the Trojan War. The continent of Europe would later be named after her, though whether this etymology came from her myth or whether her myth incorporated an existing place name remains a matter of scholarly debate. Io was a priestess of Hera, which made Zeus's seduction of her particularly brazen. When Hera grew suspicious, Zeus transformed Io into a white heifer to hide her. But Hera was not fooled. She asked for the heifer as a gift, and Zeus, unable to refuse without revealing his deception, handed Io over. Hera then set Argus Panoptes, a giant with 100 eyes, to watch Io constantly. Zeus sent Hermes to rescue Io. Hermes lulled Argus to sleep with stories and music, then killed him. Hera honored her servant by placing his 100 eyes on the tail of the peacock, her sacred bird. She then sent a gadfly to torment Io, driving the heifer across the world in madness. Io wandered through many lands until she finally reached Egypt, where Zeus restored her human form. There she gave birth to Epaphus, who became king of Egypt and ancestor to many heroes, including Danae and Perseus, bringing the bloodline full circle. Callisto was a nymph and companion of Artemis, sworn to virginity. Zeus seduced her by taking the form of Artemis herself, and when Callisto became pregnant, the deception was revealed. Artemis, furious at the broken vow, expelled Callisto from her company. Hera, adding to the punishment, transformed Callisto into a bear. Years later, Callisto's son Arcas, now a grown man and hunter, encountered a bear in the forest. He did not know it was his mother, and as he prepared to shoot, Zeus intervened. To prevent the tragedy, he placed both mother and son in the sky as constellations. Callisto became Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and Arcas became Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, or, in some versions, Botes, the herdsman. The story of Ganymede was different from the others, for Ganymede was male, a beautiful Trojan prince tending his father's flocks on Mount Ida. Zeus, struck by the youth's beauty, transformed into an eagle and carried Ganymede away to Olympus. There, Ganymede became the cupbearer of the gods, serving ambrosia and nectar at divine feasts. Zeus compensated Ganymede's father, King Tros, with a pair of immortal horses and assured him that his son had been granted eternal youth and immortality. Ganymede remained on Olympus, and Zeus eventually placed him among the stars as the constellation Aquarius, the water-bearer. These affairs reveal much about Zeus's character and the Greek understanding of divine power. Zeus was not constrained by mortal morality. His desires shaped destinies, created heroes, and altered the course of history. The children born from these unions became bridges between divine and mortal realms, carrying Zeus's bloodline and power into the human world. But the affairs also revealed Zeus's vulnerabilities. His inability to control his desires created conflict with Hera, disrupted Olympus, and caused suffering for both his lovers and their children. In pursuing mortal women, Zeus showed himself subject to passion and impulse, not the distant, perfect god of later philosophical traditions, but a deity profoundly connected to human experience, with all its joys and complications. Zeus was not merely a figure of myth, but a living presence in ancient Greek religious life. Across the Greek world, from the mainland to the islands to the colonies in Asia Minor and southern Italy, people worshipped Zeus in temples, honored him in festivals, and offered him sacrifices. His worship took many forms, reflecting his diverse roles and the varied needs of his devotees. The most famous center of Zeus worship was at Olympia in the western Peloponnese. This sanctuary was home to both the Temple of Zeus and the Olympic Games, which were held every 4 years in his honor. The Games began, according to tradition, in 776 BCE, though religious activity at the site dated back centuries earlier. Athletes from across the Greek world competed in events ranging from foot races to wrestling to chariot racing, all as offerings to Zeus. The Temple of Zeus at Olympia, completed around 456 BCE, housed one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a massive statue of Zeus created by the sculptor Phidias around 435 BCE. Archaeological evidence, including pottery discovered at Phidias's workshop, stamped with his name. confirms that the statue was created after his famous Athena Parthenos in Athens. The statue stood approximately 42 feet tall, showing Zeus seated on an elaborate throne. His skin was made of ivory, his robes of gold. In his right hand he held a figure of Nike, goddess of victory. In his left, a scepter topped with an eagle. The throne itself was decorated with precious stones, ebony, and scenes from mythology. Ancient visitors described the statue with awe. The historian Strabo wrote that if Zeus were to stand, his head would go through the temple's roof. The statue's eyes were said to hold such power and presence that viewers felt they were truly in the presence of divinity. The statue survived until late antiquity, eventually being destroyed, either by fire or earthquake, though its fame endured through descriptions and coins. The Olympic Games themselves were more than athletic competitions. They were religious festivals that included sacrifices, processions, and ceremonies. At the height of the Games, 100 oxen were sacrificed to Zeus on the great altar. Their fat and bones burned for the god while the meat was distributed among the participants and spectators. The altar, built up over centuries from the ashes of previous sacrifices, eventually became a massive mound visible from a great distance. Victory at the Olympic Games brought glory not just to the athlete but to their home city. Winners received olive wreaths cut from Zeus's sacred grove at Olympia, and many had statues erected in their honor at the sanctuary. The games were so important that all warfare among Greek city-states was suspended during their duration. A sacred truce enforced in Zeus's name. Another major cult center was at Dodona in northwestern Greece, home to one of the oldest oracles in the Greek world. Here, Zeus spoke through the rustling of oak leaves in his sacred grove. Priests and priestesses, known as the Seloi, interpreted these sounds to answer questions brought by pilgrims. People would inscribe their questions on lead tablets, which have been discovered by archaeologists, revealing concerns about everything from politics to personal relationships to agricultural decisions. The oracle at Dodona predated the more famous oracle at Delphi and maintained its importance throughout antiquity. The site also featured a theater and various temples, and it hosted athletic and musical competitions. The oak trees themselves were venerated, and the sanctuary grove was protected as sacred ground. Zeus was also worshipped as Zeus Olympios throughout the Greek world, with temples dedicated to this aspect in many major cities. In Athens, the temple of Olympian Zeus, begun in the 6th century BCE, but not completed until the 2nd century CE under the Roman Emperor Hadrian, was one of the largest temples in the ancient world. Its massive Corinthian columns, some of which still stand today, give an impression of the temple's original grandeur. Mount Lycaeus in Arcadia was another important cult site. Here Zeus was worshipped as Zeus Lycaeus, the wolf god, in rites that were ancient and mysterious even to classical Greeks. The summit of the mountain featured an ash altar where no shadows were said to fall, and it was believed that anyone who entered the sacred precinct would die within a year. Sacrifices were performed there, and the site was associated with the myth of Lycaon, the king transformed into a wolf for testing Zeus's omniscience by serving him human flesh. In addition to these major sanctuaries, Zeus received worship at countless local shrines and household altars. As Zeus Herkaios, he protected the courtyard and home, receiving offerings at family altars. As Zeus Ktesios, he guarded household wealth, often symbolized by a jar kept in the storeroom. These domestic cults show how thoroughly Zeus's presence permeated Greek life, from the grandest public festivals to the most intimate family rituals. Sacrifices to Zeus typically involved animals, especially bulls and rams. The sacrificial ritual followed a set pattern. The animal was washed, decorated with ribbons, and led to the altar. Prayers were offered, and barley groats were scattered. The animal's throat was cut, and as it died, women present would raise a ritual cry. The meat was butchered, with specific portions burned for the god, while the rest was cooked and consumed by the worshippers in a communal feast. The smoke rising from the sacrifice was believed to carry the offering to Olympus, feeding the gods. This practice reinforced the relationship between humans and the divine. Humans gave to the gods, and the gods, in turn, provided blessings, protection, and prosperity. Festivals honoring Zeus occurred throughout the year. The Diasia, celebrated in Athens, focused on Zeus Melikios, Zeus the Merciful, and involved purification rites. The Bouphonia, or ox-slaying festival, was an ancient ritual with complex ceremonies. Regional festivals varied widely, reflecting local traditions and concerns. Zeus's worship also extended beyond Greece proper. Greek colonists carried his cult to southern Italy, Sicily, and the Black Sea coast. Alexander the Great's conquests spread Greek religion to Egypt, Persia, and even India, where Zeus became identified with local supreme deities. The Romans later adopted Zeus as Jupiter, their king of gods, continuing his worship throughout the vast Roman Empire. The universality of Zeus worship reflected his central role in Greek religion. He was not a god for one city or one group, but for all Greeks, a unifying figure in a politically fragmented world. When Greeks from different cities came together, they did so under Zeus's watchful eye, swearing oaths in his name and honoring him with shared festivals and games. Zeus was not only worshipped in temples, but celebrated in literature. The ancient poets and playwrights shaped how Greeks understood their supreme god, presenting him as a complex figure whose character evolved across different literary traditions. In Homer's epics, composed probably in the 8th century BCE, Zeus appears as a powerful but limited king of the gods. In the Iliad, set during the Trojan War, Zeus attempts to remain neutral between the warring factions, but is constantly pressured by other gods who favor one side or the other. Hera and Athena support the Greeks, while Aphrodite, Apollo, and Ares aid the Trojans. Zeus must balance these competing interests while also respecting fate, which he can foresee but not always change. Homer's Zeus is remarkably human in his concerns. He loves his mortal son Sarpedon, a Trojan ally, and considers saving him from fated death. But Hera warns him that doing so would set a dangerous precedent, prompting other gods to save their favorites and disrupting the cosmic order. Zeus reluctantly allows Sarpedon to die, showing that even the king of gods is bound by fate and the rules he has established. The Iliad also shows Zeus's domestic troubles. Hera deceives him by seducing him, using Aphrodite's magical girdle to make herself irresistible, then having the god Hypnos, sleep, put Zeus into a deep slumber. While he sleeps, she helps the Greeks against his orders. When Zeus awakens and discovers the deception, he rages, but ultimately can do nothing to change what has occurred. This scene presents Zeus as powerful yet vulnerable, a king who can be outmaneuvered by his clever wife. In the Odyssey, Zeus appears more just and morally concerned. The epic opens with Zeus lamenting that mortals blame the gods for their sufferings when they bring misfortune upon themselves through their own reckless actions. He cites the example of Aegisthus, who ignored divine warnings and seduced Clytemnestra, leading to his own death at the hands of Orestes. This Zeus is more concerned with justice and moral order than the Zeus of the Iliad, reflecting perhaps a shift in religious thinking, or simply the different themes of the two poems. Hesiod's Theogony, also from the 8th century BCE, presents a more systematic account of Zeus's rise to power. Hesiod traces Zeus's lineage from chaos through Gaia and Uranus to Cronus, and finally to Zeus himself. The Theogony details the Titanomachy and establishes Zeus's legitimacy as king through both might and right. Hesiod's Zeus is a bringing order to chaos, establishing justice and creating the conditions for civilized life. Hesiod also wrote Works and Days, a didactic poem offering practical and moral advice. In this work, Zeus is presented as the guarantor of justice, watching over human affairs and punishing those who deal falsely or harm others. Hesiod warns that Zeus has 30,000 immortal watchers who observe human deeds, reporting injustice back to the god. This Zeus is active in human affairs, a moral force ensuring that wickedness does not go unpunished. The tragedians of 5th century Athens presented yet another vision of Zeus. In Aeschylus's Oresteia trilogy, Zeus is invoked as the ultimate source of wisdom and justice. The famous choral ode declares that Zeus has laid down the law that wisdom comes through suffering. This Zeus is a cosmic teacher, using pain and hardship to educate both gods and mortals, moving the world toward a higher understanding of justice. Aeschylus's Prometheus bound presents a darker Zeus. Though scholars debate whether Aeschylus actually wrote this play, in it Zeus is portrayed as a tyrant, newly come to power and ruling with cruelty. He has Prometheus chained to a rock and tortured for giving fire to humanity, showing a Zeus concerned only with maintaining his own authority and willing to punish anyone who challenges him. This was likely part of a trilogy that would have shown Zeus's character developing and softening over time, but the other plays are lost. Sophocles invokes Zeus repeatedly in his tragedies, often as a distant but just force. In Oedipus Rex, the chorus calls on Zeus to help them understand the terrible events unfolding, trusting that divine law and justice ultimately govern the universe, even when human understanding fails. Euripides offers more critical portrayals of Zeus, reflecting the intellectual skepticism of his era. In plays like Heracles and Ion, Euripides questions the justice and morality of Zeus's actions. How can Zeus be called just when he fathers illegitimate children and allows them to suffer? How can divine law be trusted when the gods behave worse than mortals? These questions reflect the philosophical debates of 5th century Athens, where traditional religion faced challenges from new ways of thinking. Beyond the tragedians, Zeus appeared in comedy as well. Aristophanes, the comic playwright, frequently parodied the gods, presenting Zeus as foolish, lecherous, or ineffectual. In The Birds, humans build a city in the sky that cuts off the gods from sacrificial smoke, forcing Zeus to negotiate. Such comic treatments show the Greeks' complex relationship with their gods, capable of reverence, questioning, and irreverent humor. The lyric poets also celebrated Zeus. Pindar, writing victory odes for Olympic champions, invoked Zeus as the source of all excellence and glory. His odes wove together myth, praise, and moral instruction, always acknowledging Zeus's supreme authority. Through these varied literary traditions, Zeus became more than a religious figure. He became a character, a symbol, a concept to be explored, questioned, and reimagined. Each poet and playwright brought their own perspective, their own era's concerns, creating a rich, multifaceted portrait that ensured Zeus's place at the heart of Greek cultural life. The worship of Zeus as a living religious practice ended long ago, suppressed by Christianity in late antiquity as pagan temples were closed and sacrifices banned. The Olympic Games, held for over 1,000 years, were abolished in 393 CE by the Christian Emperor Theodosius I. The great statue at Olympia was eventually destroyed. The oracles fell silent. Zeus's temples became ruins or were converted to churches. Yet Zeus did not disappear. He lived on, transformed, reinterpreted, reimagined across the centuries. The Romans had already identified him with their own Jupiter, merging Greek and Roman religious traditions. Jupiter inherited Zeus's attributes, his myths, and his supreme position in the Roman pantheon. As Rome conquered the Mediterranean world, Jupiter Zeus became one of the most widely recognized deities in the ancient world. When Christianity became the dominant religion, Zeus was recast as a demon or false god in Christian polemics. Early Christian writers condemned Zeus's immorality, his affairs, and his all-too-human flaws, using him as an example of why pagan religion should be abandoned. Yet even as they condemned him, Christian scholars preserved the texts that told his stories, copying manuscripts of Homer, Hesiod, and the tragedians in monastery scriptoria. Zeus survived through the very people who opposed his worship. During the Middle Ages, Zeus and the other Greek gods became allegorical figures. Medieval scholars read classical myths as coded moral lessons or veiled references to biblical truths. Zeus's thunderbolt became a symbol of divine wrath. His various forms and transformations were interpreted as lessons about the many faces of sin. The myths were studied not as religious texts, but as literature and philosophy, sources of wisdom from the ancient world. The Renaissance brought a dramatic revival of interest in classical mythology. Artists, writers, and scholars looked back to Greece and Rome as golden ages of culture and learning. Zeus reappeared in paintings, sculptures, and poetry, not as a god to be worshipped, but as a symbol of power, majesty, and the classical heritage that Renaissance thinkers wanted to reclaim. Painters like Titian, Correggio, and Veronese depicted Zeus's amorous adventures in vivid detail. Titian's Danae series showed the shower of gold descending upon the imprisoned princess. His Rape of Europa captured the moment of abduction, the white bull carrying the frightened but curious princess across blue waves. These paintings celebrated the sensuality and drama of classical myth, while also serving as vehicles for artistic virtuosity and patron flattery. Sculptors carved Zeus in marble, attempting to recreate the majesty of Phidias's lost wonder. In parks and palaces across Europe, statues of Zeus Jupiter stood as symbols of legitimate authority, royal power, drawing on ancient precedent. Kings and emperors compared themselves to Zeus, claiming to rule with his wisdom and strength. In literature, Zeus became a frequent reference point. John Milton's Paradise Lost drew on classical epic tradition, and while Milton's Christian god differed from Zeus, the influence of Homer's celestial councils and divine interventions was clear. Renaissance poets like Edmund Spenser and William Shakespeare referenced Zeus constantly, assuming their educated audiences would recognize the allusions. The Enlightenment brought new approaches to Zeus and classical mythology. Scholars began studying myths not as allegories, but as historical and cultural documents, attempting to understand what ancient people actually believed. Zeus became a subject of comparative religion, analyzed alongside gods from other cultures. Thinkers noted similarities between Zeus and other Indo-European sky-fathers, like the Norse Odin or the Vedic Indra, suggesting common roots stretching back into prehistory. The Romantic movement of the 19th century embraced Zeus and Greek mythology with passionate enthusiasm. Poets like Shelley, Keats, and Byron wrote extensively about classical themes. Shelley's Prometheus Unbound reimagined the Titans' rebellion against Zeus as a revolutionary struggle against tyranny. For the Romantics, Zeus represented both the sublime power of nature and the oppressive weight of tradition that new generations must challenge. Victorian artists continued depicting Zeus in grand historical paintings. Lord Leighton's Captive Andromache and other classical scenes decorated the walls of European galleries and museums. Classical education remained central to upper-class schooling, ensuring that every educated person knew Zeus's stories intimately. The development of archaeology in the 19th and 20th centuries brought new understanding of Zeus worship. Excavations at Olympia uncovered the foundations of Zeus's temple and workshop, where Phidias created his statue. Digs at Dodona revealed the lead tablets with their intimate questions to the god. These physical remains made Zeus's worship tangible, connecting modern scholars to ancient devotees. The 20th century saw Zeus enter new media. In literature, modernist writers like James Joyce and T.S. Eliot wove classical references throughout their works, assuming readers would catch the allusions. Joyce's Ulysses reimagined Homer's Odyssey in modern Dublin, with Zeus's influence hovering in the background of the narrative structure. Carl Jung's psychological theories gave Zeus new interpretative frameworks. Jung identified the gods as archetypes, universal patterns within the collective unconscious. From this perspective, Zeus could be understood as the archetype of the father, the king, the supreme authority figure whose pattern appears across cultures and eras. In Jungian analysis, Zeus represented not necessarily a literal being, but an eternal psychological reality, a pattern of consciousness that humans repeatedly manifest. Whether one accepts Jung's theories or not, this approach demonstrated Zeus's continued relevance to understanding human psychology. Cinema brought Zeus to life in new ways. The 1963 film Jason and the Argonauts featured Zeus as a character, played by Niall McGuinness, as a benevolent but detached game player, moving heroes like chess pieces. The 1981 film Clash of the Titans and its 2010 remake depicted Zeus as a king in his celestial palace, played by Laurence Olivier and Liam Neeson respectively, bringing gravitas to the role. Disney's 1997 animated film Hercules presented a family-friendly Zeus, voiced by Rip Torn, as a loving father figure, drastically softening the character's darker aspects for young audiences. While mythologically inaccurate, the film introduced millions of children to Greek mythology, sparking interest that would lead many to explore the original stories. In recent decades, Zeus has appeared in countless books, video games, television shows, and comics. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series reimagined Greek gods living in modern America, with Zeus as a CEO-type figure ruling from the Empire State Building. These books became phenomenally popular with young readers, creating a new generation familiar with Greek mythology. Video games like God of War series featured Zeus as a major character and antagonist, exploring themes of patricide and the cycle of violence between generations of gods. The Age of Mythology and Immortals Phoenix Rising games allowed players to interact with Zeus and other Greek deities in interactive storytelling. Comic books have long featured Zeus. DC Comics made him a recurring character in Wonder Woman stories, as Diana's pantheon included the Olympians. Marvel Comics featured Zeus in Thor and Hercules comics, sometimes teaming him with Norse and other mythological figures. These pop culture appearances, while often differing significantly from ancient sources, kept Zeus's name and basic character traits in public consciousness. The scholarly study of Zeus continues in universities worldwide. Classicists analyze ancient texts, archaeologists excavate cult sites, and historians trace how Zeus worship evolved across time and geography. Religious studies scholars examine Zeus in the context of comparative mythology, while philosophers continue to explore the theological and ethical questions his myths raise. Some modern individuals have even attempted to revive ancient Greek religion. Groups identifying as Hellenic polytheists or followers of Hellenismos worship the Greek gods, including Zeus, in reconstructed ancient practices. While relatively small in number, these modern worshippers demonstrate one form of the enduring appeal of Greek religious concepts, finding personal meaning in traditions thousands of years old. Zeus's influence extends into language itself. English words like deity and divine derive from roots related to Zeus. When we say someone has a jovial personality, we reference Jupiter, Zeus's Roman counterpart. The names of planets, the days of the week in Romance languages, astronomical terminology and countless place names preserve echoes of Zeus worship. The Olympic Games, revived in their modern form in 1896, explicitly connect to Zeus's ancient festival. Though no longer religious, the Games maintain certain ritual elements: the Olympic flame, the opening ceremonies, the oath-taking. These trace back to practices that honored Zeus thousands of years ago. Every 4 years the world comes together in celebration that, while secular, carries the DNA of Zeus's ancient festival. Zeus appears in countless works of modern art. Sculptures, paintings, digital art, street art, and installations reference the god. Artists use Zeus as shorthand for power, authority, classical beauty, or patriarchal structures they wish to critique. His image remains instantly recognizable: the bearded, muscular figure, the thunderbolt, the authoritative presence. In political discourse, Zeus occasionally appears as a metaphor. Leaders are compared to Zeus for good or ill. Political cartoons depict presidents and prime ministers hurling thunderbolts. The metaphor works because Zeus represents ultimate authority, the figure at the top of the hierarchy, the one whose word is law. Educational institutions around the world teach Greek mythology, and Zeus stands at the center of these lessons. Students learn about the gods as part of cultural literacy. Understanding Western art, literature, and thought requires familiarity with Zeus and his family. Philosophy classes discuss the problem of evil using Zeus as an example. Literature classes trace his influence through centuries of poetry and prose. Zeus has become more than a god. He has become a cultural touchstone, a reference point, a symbol that carries multiple meanings depending on context. He can represent legitimate authority or tyrannical power, divine wisdom or all too human weakness, sublime majesty or ridiculous pomposity. His flexibility as a symbol has ensured his survival across millennia. Modern scholars continue to discover new aspects of Zeus worship. Recent excavations have uncovered previously unknown temples and inscriptions. New techniques allow archaeologists to date sites more precisely, understanding how Zeus cults evolved. Digital humanities projects compile every ancient reference to Zeus, allowing scholars to analyze patterns across the entire corpus of surviving texts. The study of Zeus also connects to broader questions about religion, power and society. How do people create and worship gods? What purposes do supreme deities serve in organizing human societies? How do religious systems reflect and reinforce social hierarchies? Zeus provides a rich case study for these questions, his worship documented in unusual detail across 1,000 years of Greek and Roman civilization. Climate change and environmental concerns have even brought new relevance to Zeus as a weather god. Some scholars and activists have explored how ancient understanding of weather deities might inform modern environmental thinking. While not suggesting literal belief in Zeus, they find value in conceptualizing weather and climate as powers deserving respect and recognition rather than mere resources to exploit. Zeus's legacy is not simple or single-stranded, but multiple and contradictory, which is perhaps fitting for a god who contained such contradictions within himself. He was king and philanderer, protector of justice and breaker of his own laws, supreme authority and henpecked husband, all-seeing father and absent parent. These contradictions made him compelling to ancient worshippers and continue to make him fascinating to modern audiences. Beyond the specific stories and historical practices of worship, Zeus's mythology offers profound insights into human nature and the human condition. The ancient Greeks, in creating and telling Zeus's stories, were exploring fundamental questions about power, justice, family, and the relationship between might and right. Zeus's rise to power through overthrowing his father reflected Greek anxieties about succession and legitimate authority. How does a new regime justify itself? Zeus's answer was that he ruled not merely because he was stronger, but because he was better, bringing justice and order where Cronus brought only fear and tyranny. Yet the means of his rise, violence and rebellion against a parent, complicated this claim. Zeus himself feared being overthrown by his own son, suggesting that power obtained through force might never feel entirely secure. This cycle of overthrow, each generation of gods rising against the previous, can be read as a metaphor for social and political change. Old orders fall, new ones rise, and those who were rebels become the establishment they once opposed. Zeus, breaking this cycle by swallowing Metis rather than killing his children, showed evolution, a move away from pure violence toward a different kind of power, but it came with its own moral complications. Zeus's role as dispenser of justice, while simultaneously breaking his own rules for personal gratification, reflected real tensions in Greek society and in human psychology generally. We want our leaders to be just, to follow the law, to treat all equally. Yet we also recognize that leaders are human, subject to the same desires and weaknesses as everyone else. Zeus embodied this contradiction. He punished oath breakers while breaking his marriage vows, enforced guest friendship while abusing hospitality, upheld law while acting above it. The Greeks did not resolve this contradiction, but explored it endlessly in their myths. Sometimes Zeus faced consequences for his actions. His affairs brought him into conflict with Hera, creating domestic strife even on Olympus. His favoritism toward certain heroes or cities could provoke other gods or cause resentment. But other times, Zeus faced no consequences, his power insulating him from justice. This reflected Greek understanding of power, as it actually operates in the world. The powerful do face different standards than the powerless, not because this is just, but because this is reality. Zeus's mythology acknowledged this uncomfortable truth, while still maintaining that justice should govern the cosmos. The tension between ideal and reality, between what should be and what is, runs throughout Zeus's myths. Zeus's relationships with mortals revealed Greek thinking about the distance between human and divine. Zeus's affairs with mortal women were not simply stories of lust, but served as narrative explorations of the gulf between gods and humans. When Zeus approached mortals, he had to disguise himself, take another form, because direct encounter with divinity in its full intensity could destroy mortals, as Semele's story tragically demonstrated. This suggested to the ancient Greeks that the divine was both alluring and dangerous, that ultimate power or truth might annihilate rather than enlighten if encountered without mediation. Yet these unions were also creative, producing heroes who stood between mortal and divine, capable of extraordinary deeds. Heracles, Perseus, Helen, and others born from Zeus's mortal affairs shaped history, accomplished the impossible, became legends. In this way, the myths suggested that greatness required some spark of the transcendent, that the highest human achievements drew on something beyond purely mortal capacity. Zeus's role as father, both to gods and to mortal heroes, explored what fatherhood means and what children owe their parents. Zeus's own father tried to destroy him, leading Zeus to rebel. Yet Zeus himself was not always a good father. He pursued his desires without regard for the consequences to his children. He allowed his wife to persecute his sons and daughters. He favored some children while neglecting others. These stories do not present an ideal of fatherhood, but a complex, flawed reality. Fathers have power over children, but do not always use it wisely. Children may love, fear, resent, and rebel against fathers simultaneously. The divine family on Olympus mirrored human families in their dysfunction, their competing loyalties, their unresolved conflicts. Zeus's thunderbolt symbolized swift, decisive action, the power to judge and punish in an instant. Yet Zeus often held back, showing restraint, allowing situations to develop, letting mortals work out their own destinies. This balance between intervention and restraint reflected Greek thinking about fate and free will. The gods could act, but they did not always act. Mortals had agency, but they operated within limits. The relationship between divine power and human freedom was not resolved but held in creative tension. The various epithets and cult titles of Zeus revealed the many ways Greeks related to the divine. Zeus Xenius protected strangers, acknowledging vulnerability and the importance of mutual aid. Zeus Horkios enforced oaths, maintaining trust in a world where written contracts were rare. Zeus Melikios offered mercy and purification, recognizing that people make mistakes and need second chances. Each cult title represented a different face of divinity, a different human need addressed. This multiplicity suggests that Zeus was not one thing but many things, containing contradictions, responding to different circumstances differently. The Greeks did not demand consistency from their gods, but recognized complexity, the way that any person, divine or mortal, contains multitudes. Zeus's conflicts with other gods, particularly Poseidon and Hera, showed that even supreme authority faces challenges and must negotiate rather than simply command. Zeus ruled by building consensus, by making alliances, by respecting the domains of other gods, even while maintaining his own preeminence. This reflected Greek political ideals, where even kings needed the support of nobles, where assemblies deliberated, where multiple voices had to be heard. The Greeks lived in a world of city-states, independent and often competing, yet sharing language, religion, and culture. Zeus provided a unifying figure, a god all Greeks could honor together, even as they maintained local traditions and loyalties. In this way, Zeus helped create Greek identity, providing a shared reference point in a politically fragmented world. Zeus's fallibility, his susceptibility to deception, his inability to change fate, all made him more relatable than an omnipotent, perfect deity might be. The Greeks did not want gods who were infinitely distant or incomprehensible. They wanted gods who engaged with the world, who had personalities, who could be understood and related to. Zeus's flaws made him accessible, someone who could be bargained with, appealed to, even occasionally tricked. This anthropomorphism, making gods in human image, has been both praised and criticized. Critics from ancient philosophers to modern theologians have argued that projecting human characteristics onto the divine is naive or impious. But defenders argue that anthropomorphism allows relationship, making the divine knowable in the present rather than abstract and distant. Zeus represented the latter approach, a god who could be imagined, depicted, whose stories could be told and retold. The persistence of Zeus's stories across millennia suggests they touch something fundamental. The themes his myths explore, questions of power and justice, authority and rebellion, desire and restraint, morality and pragmatism, remain relevant. Different eras interpret Zeus differently, emphasizing aspects that resonate with their concerns, but the basic stories remain compelling. In Zeus, the Greeks created not a simple figure, but a profound exploration of divinity, power, and the human condition. He contained contradictions because existence itself is contradictory. He was both supreme and limited, just and unjust, loving and cruel, because these tensions exist in the world and in ourselves. Understanding Zeus means grappling with these complexities, not resolving them, but holding them in balance, as the Greeks themselves did. As we reach the end of our journey through the myths and worship of Zeus, we find ourselves standing where we began, gazing up at Mount Olympus, where clouds still gather and thunder still rolls, though no divine court assembles there now. Zeus, king of the gods, ruler of sky and thunder, has been our guide through the landscape of Greek mythology, and in following his story, we have traced the arc of an entire culture's imagination. Zeus was never just one thing. He was the rebel son who overthrew his tyrannical father, establishing a new order through violence and courage. He was the wise king who divided the cosmos, established justice, and maintained balance among competing powers. He was the storm god whose thunderbolt struck fear into mortal hearts, and whose rain brought life to the fields. He was the protector of hospitality, the enforcer of oaths, the guardian of social order. He was also the unfaithful husband, whose affairs created heroes and tragedy. He was the father who loved his children, yet often failed them. He was the all-powerful god who could be deceived, manipulated, and bound by forces greater than himself. In Zeus, the Greeks embodied both divine transcendence and human limitation, creating a god who was supreme yet accessible, powerful yet flawed, eternal yet intimately involved in the passing moment. The temples where Zeus was worshipped have crumbled. The Olympic Games he inspired ceased for over 1,500 years before being revived in secular form. The oracles where he spoke fell silent long ago. The sacrifices offered to him, the prayers spoken in his name, the festivals celebrated in his honor, all belong to a past so distant it can barely be imagined. Yet Zeus endures. He lives in the stories we still tell, in the art we still create, in the language we still speak. Every thunderstorm echoes his presence. Every reference to the King of Gods invokes his authority. Every exploration of power and justice walks paths the Greeks mapped out in Zeus's name. He has become part of the foundation of Western culture, a touchstone we return to again and again. What makes Zeus relevant across such vast stretches of time? Perhaps it is his complexity, his refusal to be simply good or evil, wise or foolish, just or unjust. He contains multitudes, reflecting the complexity of power itself and the human beings who wield it. In a world that too often demands simple answers, Zeus reminds us that truth is complicated, that authority comes with responsibility and contradiction, that even the mightiest must grapple with forces beyond their control. The myths of Zeus ask questions that have no easy answers. How should power be used? What is justice? How do we balance competing goods and navigate conflicting duties? What do we owe to family, to community, to strangers? How do we understand forces greater than ourselves? These questions remain as urgent today as they were 3,000 years ago when Homer sang of Zeus's glories and Hesiod recounted his genealogy. Zeus was the ancient Greeks' attempt to understand the world and their place in it. In his stories, they explored their deepest concerns and highest aspirations. They grappled with mortality by imagining immortality. They confronted their powerlessness by depicting ultimate power. They wrestled with moral ambiguity by creating a god who embodied both justice and injustice. In doing so, they created something that transcended its original context, speaking to fundamental aspects of human experience that remain constant even as cultures change. Standing in the ruins of Zeus's temples today, feeling the Mediterranean sun and hearing the wind through ancient stones, it is easy to feel the weight of time, the passage of ages, the impermanence of all human endeavor. The civilization that built these temples is gone. The language they spoke has evolved beyond recognition. The world they knew has been transformed by technology, politics, and time. Yet the stories remain. Zeus still hurls his thunderbolt in paintings and films. Children still learn about his myths in schools around the world. Artists still reference him. Writers still draw inspiration from him. Scholars still study him. He has achieved a kind of immortality more lasting than bronze statues or marble temples, living on in human memory and imagination. Perhaps this is the final lesson of Zeus, that stories matter, that imagination shapes reality, that the myths we tell ourselves define who we are and who we might become. The ancient Greeks understood this, investing enormous creative energy into developing their mythology, refining and elaborating it across centuries. They knew that in telling these stories, they were not escaping reality, but engaging with it at its deepest level, exploring truths too complex for simple statement. Zeus, king of the gods, ruler of sky and thunder, remains what he has always been. A mirror in which we see ourselves reflected, a lens through which we examine power, justice, desire, and duty. He is both the storm that threatens to destroy us and the rain that gives us life. He is both the authority we must respect and the tyrant we must resist. He is both the father we long for and the father we fear. He contains all these contradictions because we contain them, because existence contains them. As we conclude this exploration, I invite you to carry these stories with you. Whether you encounter Zeus in a museum, in a book, in a film, or simply in the roll of thunder on a dark afternoon, remember the richness of his mythology, the complexity of his character, the depth of the questions his stories raise. The ancient Greeks gave us a remarkable gift in their mythology, and Zeus stands at its center, eternal king of a realm that exists wherever humans gather to tell stories and wonder about the forces that shape our world. If you enjoyed this journey through the mythology of Zeus, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are many more myths to explore, many more gods and heroes whose stories deserve to be told. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what aspect of Zeus's mythology you found most compelling, what questions it raised for you, what connections you see to our world today. Until next time, may your paths be blessed, your storms manageable, and your stories worth telling. Good night.